In reviewing how the United States was able to expand, we just remember Hawaii, how those American planters led by Sanford B. Dole had overthrown the monarchy under Queen Liliuokalani of Hawaii. We also remember how the United States is going to end up buying the Philippines from the Spanish at the end of the Spanish-American War, even though the Filipinos had already expressed their desire to be independent. Were actually fighting the Spanish to be independent when the United States bought them. So when the United States buys the Philippines, then a war is going to break out there too. And the United States winds up fighting a war in the Philippines that lasts longer and costs much more money than the Spanish-American War did to begin with. So they're going to end up putting in William Howard Taft as the very first governor of the Philippines. He goes on to become president later. But again, the Philippines really wanted their independence. So when the United States comes in and takes it, it's not well received. They do eventually become an independent nation in the 1940s. I think 1942 is when they become an independent nation. So it does eventually happen, but the U.S. does have control over them until that point. Puerto Rico does become a territory of the United States, and the Filipino people are actually citizens. They become citizens in 1917. The United States does intervene in Cuba with the Teller Amendment. The Teller Amendment basically just guarantees Cuban independence. We required the Cubans to put in 2 amendments to their constitution once they gained their independence. The first was the Teller Amendment that guaranteed they would keep their independence. And the second was the Platt Amendment. The Platt Amendment is what is really going to allow the United States to have economic interest in Cuba. It is also going to allow us to establish a naval base there. That naval base is still there in Cuba. It's called Guantanamo Bay. So basically, the United States refuses to pull our military out of Cuba until they ratified their new constitution containing these 2 amendments. So once again, the United States is going to exercise our power through the use of military force or the threat of the use of military force. So while we didn't make them, we basically used our power to get what we wanted. We're also very interested in Asia. We wanted to make sure we were able to extend our sphere of influence into China. The open door policy notes are a really good example of how we were trying to exercise that. John Hay, who was the Secretary of State at the time, is going to write these open door policy notes that are asking for access to China. Specifically, we wanted to establish a trade relationship with China. We didn't want other European powers to monopolize that trade relationship. So once again, we needed new markets for our products, and this is going to hopefully allow us to get our foot in the door in China. We're also going to begin to become much more active in other ways as well. When the war broke out between Russia and Japan, we are going to see our President Teddy Roosevelt step in and act as an arbitrator. Remember, an arbitrator is a third party that negotiates. In this case, it was trying to negotiate a peace. And he winds up winning a Nobel Peace Prize for that intervention. The Panama Canal is another really good example of the United States exerting our influence. Panama, at this point in time, was a part of Colombia. And at this time, in order to trade or to ship something from the east coast of the United States to the west coast, you had to go all the way down and around the tip of South America to do that. Well, the Isthmus of Panama was a very thin strip of land that we wanted to have them build a canal through. So we tried to negotiate a canal treaty with Colombia, but the Colombians refused. When they refused, we then went to Panama and encouraged them to have their very own revolution for independence. We agreed that we would assist them in this revolution as long as they would allow this canal to be built after their independence was gained. So basically, Teddy Roosevelt helped start a revolution to get the canal built in Panama. After they were successful and Panama was its own country, they do allow that construction of the Panama Canal to begin. It took 10 years. It was actually started by the French and completed by the United States. Thousands upon thousands died from various accidents and disease in order to build that canal. But it is a very important piece of of history, and that fact that, and it's a modern marvel, the fact they were able to build that is really impressive, but it is going to really cut down on that shipping time and travel time. This is a really good example of Teddy Roosevelt's big stick foreign policy. That whole idea of speak soft and carry a big stick. You're not going to necessarily use that stick. It's using that threat of force to get what you want. And Teddy Roosevelt was very, very good at that, using the threat of force to get exactly what he wanted. And this is the example of that. So what is our U.S. foreign policy? It is all based on the Monroe Doctrine that goes all the way back to the foundation of our country, that is going to remind the European nations to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. So what we do over time is just kind of build on that. The Roosevelt Corollary said that the United States would be the only nation to intervene in the Western Hemisphere. Those are going to be those big stick politics that Teddy Roosevelt is so good at using. He said, we'll only do it when we need to, but the United States will be the only one to exercise that right. It's going to be built on later by William Howard Taft's dollar diplomacy. This is where we're going to use our financial policies to get what we want. Basically, we would give loans to other struggling countries in exchange for benefits for the United States. And finally, Wilson's missionary diplomacy. This said that the United States would refuse to negotiate with illegal governments. That definition of illegal governments is a government that would oppress its people or not allow their people a voice in their government. So it said we would not work with them or negotiate with them. So what is the impact of this imperialism? Well, the United States is now a world power. We are one of the most powerful nations in the world after the time of the Spanish-American War. There was, however, a debate over the idea of imperialism. Was it morally and ethically right for us to exercise the power that we had gained? So just because we can, does that mean that we should? So that's still a question we continue to wrestle with here in the United States. There were many anti-U.S. feelings around the world. This is when many people around the world began to really dislike the United States because of the way we were exercising our power. Obviously in the Philippines, when we bought them instead of granting them their independence. In Latin America, where we were using our financial policies to manipulate those countries and get what we wanted to benefit our country. And in Mexico, where a freedom fighter named Pancho Villa, who I'm sure you have heard of, was trying to gain more voice in their government. They actually petitioned the United States under Wilson's missionary diplomacy, claiming that their government was oppressing its people and asked for U.S. assistance in fighting off that government. Well, because that official Mexican government benefited the United States, Wilson declined to assist them. So Pancho Villa is going to wind up fighting against not only the United States, but others as well. And he ends up actually killing several Americans. So we do see that Pancho Villa, who was a Mexican freedom fighter, was petitioning for assistance, but was not able to get it. So this is going to lead to even more anti-feelings against the United States during this imperialist time.